The air grew colder as they climbed higher. The mist became so thick that they could barely see the person walking right in front of them. They had to call out to each other every few minutes just to make sure they were all still together. "Ryan, you there?" Demas would shout. "Still here," Ryan would call back, his voice sounding distant even though he was only a few feet away. The cold was seeping into their bones now, making their fingers and toes feel numb. It was a damp, heavy cold that their jackets could not keep out. It felt like the mountain was breathing on them, its breath a chilling, wet fog. They felt very small and very vulnerable. It was then that they heard it. It was a faint sound, almost lost in the thick air. It sounded like a whisper. It was not in their language. It was a soft, hissing sound that seemed to come from all around them at once. They all stopped dead in their tracks, their heads turning, trying to find the source of the noise. "What was that?" Fajar asked, his voice barely audible. No one answered. They just stood there, listening. The whispering came again, a little closer this time. It was a chilling, inhuman sound that made the hairs on their arms stand up. It was the sound of something ancient and sad. "It's just the wind," Ryan said, but his voice lacked conviction. There was no wind. The air was perfectly still. The mist hung around them without moving. The whisper had not sounded like wind whistling through trees. It had sounded like a voice, a secret being told in a language they could not understand. Demas, who was usually so quick with a joke, was pale. He kept looking around, his eyes wide with fear. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. It felt like dozens of eyes were on them, hidden just beyond the curtain of white mist. They were trespassing in a place where they were not welcome. They started walking again, faster this time. They did not talk. The only sounds were their hurried footsteps and their ragged breaths. The whisper had scared them more than the shadow on the path. A shadow could be a trick of the light, but a voice was different. A voice meant something was there with them, something that could see them even when they could not see it. The fun adventure had turned into a nightmare. They were no longer climbing toward a beautiful sunrise. They were trying to escape a feeling of dread that was growing heavier with every step they took up the silent, whispering mountain. They decided to take a short break. Their legs were burning and their hearts were pounding from fear and exertion. They found a small, flat rock just off the path and sat down, huddling together for warmth and comfort. They drank some water from their bottles and tried to eat a little. But honestly, no one had much of an appetite. The silence had returned, but it was not comforting. It was a tense, waiting silence. Fajar took off one of his hiking boots for just a moment to adjust his sock, which had bunched up uncomfortably inside. He placed the heavy boot on the rock right next to him, not more than a foot away. They sat there for maybe 5 minutes, not speaking, just listening to the mountain. The mist swirled around them, sometimes thinning for a moment to reveal the dark shape of a twisted tree, then thickening again to hide everything. Ryan checked his compass, but the needle was spinning wildly, unable to find north. "That's strange," he muttered, tapping the glass. It was working fine before. This new development only added to their growing sense of unease. They were high on a mountain in a thick fog, with a compass that did not work, and they were not alone. They all felt it. The presence was still there, watching them from the mist. When Fajar finished adjusting his sock, he reached for his boot. But it was gone. He patted the rock beside him, his hand meeting only cold, damp stone. "Guys," he said, his voice rising in panic, "my boot, it's gone." The others immediately turned on their headlamps and pointed them at the ground around the rock. They searched everywhere, in the dirt, under the nearby ferns, behind the rock. But the boot was nowhere to be found. It had been right next to him. No one had moved. There had been no sound of it falling or being dragged away. It had simply vanished into thin air, as if a hand had reached out of the fog and taken it. Now real fear took hold. This was not a trick of the mind or the wind. This was a physical object, a heavy hiking boot, gone without a trace. Demas started breathing heavily on the verge of panic. "What's happening? This isn't normal," he stammered. Adi was crying silently, tears freezing on his cheeks. Even Rian looked terrified. "We have to go back," he said, his voice firm but strained. "We go back down. Now!" But when they stood up and looked at the path, they could not tell which way was down and which way was up. The trail looked the same in both directions, a faint line disappearing into the white, endless fog. They were lost. Panic began to set in. They were lost on a mountain that seemed to be actively working against them. Fajar had to hop on one foot, supported by Dimas, which slowed them down immensely. Every direction looked the same. The mist was a white wall, a prison with no visible exits. Ryan tried to lead them, picking a direction that felt like it was downhill, but after walking for what felt like an hour, the path started to climb steeply again. They were going in circles, trapped in a maze of fog and trees. The cold was getting worse and exhaustion was setting in. Their hope of seeing the sunrise was gone, replaced by the desperate need to simply get off the mountain. As they stumbled through the fog, they started seeing it again. The figure, the phantom climber. It would appear for a moment at the edge of their vision, a tall, dark silhouette standing motionless among the trees, only to disappear when they turned their heads to get a better look. It was always at a distance, always silent, always watching. Sometimes they would all see it at once. Other times, only one of them would catch a glimpse, making the others doubt their sanity. But the sightings became more frequent, more bold. It was as if the phantom was herding them, guiding them deeper into the mountain's cold heart. The atmosphere grew stranger. They found things on the path that did not belong there. An old, rusted canteen, the kind soldiers used long ago, a single woven straw sandal, half buried in the mud. These objects were from a different time, out of place on a modern hiking trail. It felt like they were not just lost in space, but lost in time as well. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something sweet and decaying, like old flowers. The whispers returned closer this time, and they could almost make out words, though they still could not understand the language. It was a chorus of sorrowful voices swirling in the fog around them. Fear gave way to despair. They were cold, tired, and hopelessly lost. Fajar could barely walk, and Adi was shivering uncontrollably. They huddled together, defeated. "We're not going to make it," Dimas said, his voice flat and empty. Rian, the leader, had no answers. He just stared into the mist, his face a mask of exhaustion and terror. They were just boys, and the mountain was a giant, ancient thing that had decided to play a cruel game with them. The phantom climber was no longer just a distant shadow. It was the master of this game, and it was slowly closing in on them. They were trapped in its world.